Good morning, all you wonderful snowbirds. Thank you for coming out on this, in this blizzard. Well, the blizzard is over, gratefully. Today's speaker is a direct descendant of two of the most famous mayors in Milwaukee history. Frank Zeidler was mayor, and he resigned his office to serve in World War II. And regrettably, he didn't come back. He was killed in action. Zeidler Park downtown is named after him. Michael's father, Frank Zeidler, is known as the socialist mayor in the 60s, and he's still remembered to this day. But Michael never attempted to cash in on his family name, unlike some people that will remain nameless. Robert Kennedy Jr. He's lived his own quiet life as a math instructor, like me, as a delivery person, and with a lifelong love affair with mathematics, particularly applied mathematics. He been amazed to learn that he designs, sews his own clothing. What he's wearing today, he made himself. He built, his car was broken into, so he built a two-story garage without a center post, just mathematical principles for the trusses. Michael told me that he started working on the tenets of today's presentation back in 1964. This was 6 years before the Sunday Morning Forum came into existence. So it's going to be like a bottle of fine wine. And today we get to open it. Please welcome Michael Zeidler.
Thank you, Christian. You know, I'm going to mention, first of all, that Christian, I talked about my father, who had been the mayor of Milwaukee. My father had an influence in the type of research in mathematics that I've done, that I'm bringing here today. And it's a funny story that goes way back to 1948, the year he was first in office. Late in that year at Christmas time, we had a house fire, okay? And what happened was we were out of the building, the family children were spread in different places, and we were sent to different places. I was sent to my grandfather's house, and my aunt was my caretaker, and with two of my sisters, and other ones went to other houses. Well, this was that time. Well, when we were able to return home after it had been repaired, my mother took me over to Center Street Grade School, where I had started in September, and she said to Miss Miller, the teacher, we put Michael back in here? And Miss Miller said, it's almost the end of the second semester. We're going to have to hold him back. Michael is going to have to flunk kindergarten. Oh my goodness, right? And my mother said, but why? She said, well, I'll show you. Michael, these blocks on the ground over here build something. And I said, what's she talking about? Blocks? I didn't know what she was talking about. And she turned around and said, Mrs. Zeidler, you see, he's not ready for first grade. Well, what happened then, where Frank's involvement was, Frank heard the story, and he said to my mother, Agnes, buy Michael some toy blocks so he can learn to build things. And I learned to build towers and things. And that was the beginning of learning spatial reasoning. Later on, as we got toward in the fifth grade, I took several art classes at the Leighton Art School, and I learned more about spatial reasoning and thinking about pictures from the artists who were all, I think, volunteers. I didn't think being paid people. And toward 8th grade, my father taught me how to use some works with drafting, in which I continued taking some of those drafting skills in high school. And those things all became the basis of learning spatial reasoning. So today, what I want to do is I want to talk about this adjacency theory. But I also want to mention one other thing. 409 years ago, there was a scientist, his name was Galileo Galilei, and he spoke persuasively for the Copernican system of astronomy, which meant that the Earth is in orbit around the sun with the other planets. But at that time, the Jesuits were very adamant in believing the Aristotelian philosophy that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything else was moving around it, right? And the Jesuits got so mad that they subjected Galileo to an inquisition, and then Galileo was tried, he was forced to recant, and then ultimately he spent the rest of his life under house arrest. So here was a case where a man was really in conflict with some of the ideas that were very popular at the time, and what happened was he was punished for it. The topic that I'm talking about today will get into the reasoning processes, of how the human brain works, what consciousness is all about. And there are lots of ideas about consciousness and so forth. And so I'm going to lead you to that understanding. In order to deal with the mathematical structure of consciousness, what we need to do is think about a concept called adjacency theory. Adjacency theory is a math topic which I've kind of developed, which started out way back in the 1960s when I was trying to solve a problem which was called the four-color math conjecture. Because there was a mathematician in England, not a mathematician, a map maker in England, cartographer, who would draw maps, and one day he went to a math instructor and a professor at a university, whatever, and he said, "Why is it that every map I draw, I can always color all of the states, the regions on the map with only 4 colors? Why don't I sometimes need 5 colors or more than that?" Oh, excuse me. And what happened was that math professor looked at the problem and he said, "You know something, I can't come up with a good proof for it." And he told other math professors, and it was over 100 years before there was acceptable proof. And now there have been several proofs, but they're complex proofs, and they're not really made for all of us to think about. Some people, whatever. But anyway, it was a long problem. Well, I was one of the people who picked up on that puzzle. Why does it take 4 colors to do a map? And so the work that I have here, and I'm going to present on a theory of consciousness, kind of is a spin-off from that research at that time. Now, let me tell you what this concept of adjacency theory is all about. All of you know what a map looks like. We've seen maps of the United States. We've seen maps of Wisconsin. We have maps of buildings, right? We have maps of the world and so forth. And we all are familiar with maps. Well, what I want to do is show you how you can take a map apart. In the diagram, the handout which you have, on this 3rd page, what you'll see is a map. A map is kind of a thing of about 8. There are 8 regions there, and inside every one of the regions, what we do is we plot what you could call a capital, one point inside the region. Okay, and then what we do is on the very next page, on page 4, you'll see an image. And the image is in which the capitals are connected. Now, what we're doing here is we're connecting the capitals with a tree-shaped figure. You know how trees work? They branch out in many directions. Even the roots branch out in various directions, and so forth, and so forth. And what we do is we connect all those capitals with a tree. Now, then what we do is and I'm going to tell you that every map can be done this way. In every map, every drawing, every image that we have in our lives, what we can do is put a little dot in it and connect it with other ones with a tree-like figure. And so all figures look like this. Well, now, on page 5, you'll see a figure called 6. In that figure, what you're seeing is the tree-shaped figure now has a hollow inside. What the tree-shaped figure is, it's the rim of the dendrite, okay? And when we look at the rim of the dendrite, suddenly we're reminded of a concept that was developed by a man named Camille Jordan, a French mathematician and engineer. And Camille Jordan said, hey, if you take a flat sheet picture and you draw a circle on it, on that picture, what happens is that circle, which is a continuous line, separates the plane, that flat sheet, into two parts. One is the inside, and one is outside the curve. And those of us who will look at a picture of that, you lay a rubber band on a sheet of paper and say there's something inside the rubber band, there's something outside the rubber band. You say, well, that's obvious, isn't it? But it really took mathematicians some real work to prove that concept into the rigors of mathematics. Well, now what we do here is I start using spatial reasoning in this process. We have this rim that's drawn around map. And what we do is we use a concept that in topology, mathematics, was you say the image is drawn on a rubber sheet and we're able to stretch it and so forth. And what we do here is take the inside of this figure and the inside of this Jordan curve, and we blow it up like a balloon. And when we blow it up, what happens is the rim, that rim of the Jordan of the dendrite becomes a circle, and then inside we see lines which were stretched out, and they show adjacencies. They show what we call dendritic adjacencies, and outside what we see a special pattern which forms tentacular adjacencies. And so the map that we have there, you can see it in figure 8, the way it's drawn into this standard form, right? And you say, well, what's the purpose of doing this, right? Well, the objective here is to say what we want to do is be able to describe this map with with some simple ideas. And when we look at this standard form, which like in figure 8, what we're able to do is identify adjacencies, these boundaries in the map, as either being left or right adjacencies. And so if you go to figure 9 and figure 10, what you'll see in figure 9, you'll see dendritic adjacencies. You know that they're all around the outside of the thing. And then in figure 10, there are tentacular adjacencies. Okay, 2 kinds of adjacencies. Now, here's a concept that is would be new to mathematics. Way back, several hundred years ago, we had a mathematician who was looking at maps, said, hey, it appears that what we have in mathematics, in maps, is there's a relationship between the number of faces, the number of countries of the map, the number of vertices, which are points that connect 3 or more regions at a point, and the number of edges in the map. And what he said was, hey, if you would take the number of faces and you add the number of vertices, what you get is the number of edges plus 2, a very simple math concept. Today what happens is you could go in and look at books in topology, in graph theory and so forth, and in geometry places, and what you'll do is you'll encounter Euler's idea. This Leonhard Euler, who was a brilliant mathematician of so many years ago, did this. And that concept was right there. But now what I'm doing is I'm suggesting, hey, wait a second. I see a different way of looking at a plane. Euler was looking at a plane, I think, like it was looked at by thousands of years ago. We said a plane is a flat surface like a sheet of paper that extends in all directions, okay? And that's the plane. And I'm telling you that I believe that what happens, another way to look at a plane is to say, if you would draw a Jordan curve on the plane is separated into it's that area inside and that area outside. And what happens is the area inside is a tree structure. The area outside is also a tree structure. So really, it may be a better way to define a plane would be to say a plane is really two dendrites which are separated by this curve, and so forth, the Jordan curve. And so this was a concept that has come up. It's very different. And what it means is that when you look at a map, all of the edges are not the same anymore. But the edges are of two types. They're what I call dendritic edges and tentacular edges, those two kinds of things. Now, what happens is with this kind of a thing, we're able to think of some other concepts. And some of the concepts that would come along were, well, you know, is this telling us something about how many drawings, how many illustrations there are? Which illustrations are similar to one another and so forth? Well, what happens is we can go through adjacency theory and we can produce the counts of how many, for example, maps that have 8 regions and what are the various structures of them. And so there's a very specific thing. And it turns out that every image we see in our lives, they're photographs, they're drawings, they're paintings from famous painters, they're sketches and so forth. All of these images can be broken down using this concept of adjacency theory. Now, so what happens now is okay, so we have a concept. We said, hey, we can take a map, and what we're able to do with this map is we're able to analyze it, and when we analyze it, we've converted the map to a set of numbers. He said, you converted a map to a set, yeah, every map can be converted to a set of numbers. But then, doing math work, I looked at it and said, hey, I wonder, can we go backwards? Can we take a set of numbers and produce a map? Can we take the random numbers or specific numbers that we want of adjacencies, which are dendritic or tentacular adjacencies, and produce a map? And the answer came out to be yes, we can. What we're able to do is use these random numbers or whatever, and we can produce a map from the thing. So this became this concept. You take a map, get a set of numbers, or take a set of numbers, and you can go back and get a map. Okay, it's a brand new idea would be in mathematics. You will not find this concept in any math book, any math journal. I've never heard mathematicians talk about it. This is my concept from research, and I haven't released it. This is the first group I've ever talked to about this sort of thing. Okay, but so here is this concept. We said, hey, look we have a picture, we have an image, and so forth, and it has this ability. It has this mathematical ability. We can convert it to numbers or convert it to back. Now let's talk a little bit about biology. We'll talk about biology of human vision. Humans, we see things. We have a picture in front of us all the time. It's changing over again, but we have a picture in front of us. And so the question is, does adjacency theory apply to human vision? What a thought. A thought, human vision, or the eye, is said to be an extension of the human brain. It's the one part of the human brain that we can see, and we can see some of its operations. And usually when we think about the eye, what we're thinking about is there's a lens, and we focus, and there's an image on the back of the retina. We've all seen this in science books and other things, right? Well, what I'm looking at and saying is, hey, there's something about this. Adjacency theory applies to images that have these tree structures. The human nervous system has a tree structure to it, okay? And so adjacency theory should apply to this tree structure we call the human nervous system. The eye is part of our system, okay? So what I'm saying is, what appears to happen is that we could apply adjacency theory to vision and say, oh, that's kind of neat. Maybe it gives us an idea about how to talk about what's going on inside the brain with vision. So here I've gone through this kind of concept, and then I said to myself, okay, what about hearing? What about taste? What about feeling? I said to myself, you know, we have this nervous system. Can we somehow relate the processes that are happening with the eye to the nervous system, to other parts of the nervous system? And then I looked at it and I said, you know, there's a question that I have, and the question is, do nerve cells have the ability to either excite or turn off other nerve cells? And I said, I don't know, I'm not a biologist. But I had a granddaughter who was enrolled at the University of Washington in a biology program, who ultimately graduated with a degree in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology because she wants to be a doctor. And I sent her an email, and I said, Maddie, do nerve cells have the ability to excite or suppress other nerve cells? And very shortly, she sent me a note back, and she said, yes, they do. Nerve cells can suppress other nerve cells and effectively turn off parts of the system. I said, okay, because there's a kind of a clue. And I said, well, okay, this is really a kind of a fascinating idea that she said. And I said, you know, what happens then is I'm getting the idea that this concept that we're looking at applying adjacency theory to vision will apply to hearing, it will apply to taste, it will apply to feeling, and so forth. And what happens is there would be an ability to depress activities in parts of the nervous system. I said, oh, this is kind of fascinating that you can do this. But now we go back to adjacency theory and said, you know, when we use adjacency theory to create a map, what we do is we say, we do this, I can do this sequentially and say, here's an adjacency on a map, 2 to the right and 5 to the left meet, and they're adjacent. I said, okay, wonderful. But when it happens, when we do this, when there is an adjacency formed, there are other adjacencies that are prohibited, okay? And so what happens is we give a set of numbers to an algorithm that creates a map. Each time we put adjacency in, some members are prohibited. And now comes the exciting part. We keep doing this, and what happens when we've filled the matrix, you might say, is we have a matrix that represents an image. We have a matrix that represents an image after we put this stuff together, okay? And so, it appears that what is taking place here is that in the nervous system, it appears to me that what happens is the ability to turn off parts of the nerve system creates in the human brain, or the memory system, creates in the human memory system a map, or the adjacencies of a map. And it says to me, hey, what the system does is all this information that comes to us seems to become a map in the system, and the map is what we respond to, which is part of our behavior system. And apparently this type of thing works very rapidly, maybe 10 times a second or something like that, to create maps that we have. So it appears to me that what was going on here is what we've kind of discovered here is that the human nervous system seems to be always focused on creating a map. And this could be considered to be self-organizing. This may be the way the human brain and the human body self-organizes itself, and we become one. And so this was a kind of an interesting concept, because for a long time people have said, well, how does the human organize? When they're young, how do we become a human and have this continuous ability? And so he said, well, it looks like the whole system of the human body may be related to an imitation of the logic of the vision system that we've discovered, we could discover through adjacency theory. And this is kind of an exciting concept. But then, you sit back and you say to yourself, well, hold it, what kind of evidence or proof do we have? Well, I'm going to tell you one of them. All of us know that when we're young, we have a kind of a primitive conscious system. And as we get a little bit older, it becomes stronger and stronger, and people learn to talk and so forth. We go through the various stages of life, all the way through life. But what happens with our conscious system is it's continuous. From the time we are young to the time we are old, we never have a stage where you find, for example, in computers, where you have to reload it, when we have to turn off everything that's in our system and have our body reloaded, and so that we can do it. In a computing system, artificial intelligence, all the common programs around, when you change the program, what you have to do is put the new program in and run it, and now you can do the new thing. But with consciousness, we don't do that. Now, how might that relate to this concept that we have in adjacency theory? Well, what happens is adjacency theory shuts off parts of the nervous system and would create this map, the logic of a map inside the brain system, right? And if, for example, parts of the system are shut down, trying to shut it down again changes nothing. Okay? If the system is growing and new nervous systems new parts of the nervous system are increased, what would happen is that those things would be part of that system where nerves would shut down other nerves. Okay? And that becomes the thinking process that we have. And what this says, too, is it appears that consciousness probably begins forming maybe within weeks of conception. Wow, that when nerves have the ability to excite and other nerves, then what we say, hey, what we're doing is we're seeing consciousness forming, and then by the time the child is 9 months, a year, or so forth old, what happens is the consciousness system is fairly elaborate. Okay, but this is what this type of system seems to be implying. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do here, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell you a couple other ideas here about this concept of consciousness. I'm going to go way back in the back of the publication. I think is on page 25. Okay, and I want to give you some ideas about consciousness, how this theory might apply that. Now, I'm 25, 25, please, okay? Now, I also want to tell you something. I am not a professional academician. I'm not part of a university, okay? I do not have a PhD. I don't have any of these things. I do have a degree from UWM. So the thing is, you're not listening to someone who's coming out of the university who's very careful about what they say. I'm telling you what I'm seeing in this by research, and what you have to say is, okay, this is Mike's ideas, and you can believe things or don't believe them. You can question what I'm doing, and I don't mind that if you want to do it. But so here's what I want to mention. First of all, I've already mentioned the fact that consciousness appears to be a self-organizing process in the human mind, and it's the reason why we have this entity, why we think we are. Okay. I also mentioned that consciousness has this lifetime continuity to it. We start young, we're conscious, and we have things. And we also know that sometimes individuals have terrible events. They have accidents, they're in military things, they lose limbs, or they have parts of their body aren't working properly. But you'll also notice that when that happens, consciousness is not interrupted. The brain does not have to be reloaded like a computer. Okay? And so you should understand that. So if there are loss of parts in the nervous system, we still have the ability to maintain consciousness, and people do this even after terrible events, strokes and other things like this. Oftentimes there still is consciousness. Okay? And now I also should mention that in consciousness, it appears that we have very few what we call operators, the mathematical process. We appear to be able to excite and to be able to shut down nerve systems. And it's like, okay, in consciousness, in computing machines, and I've worked with computing machines at the machine level, machine instruction level, and I'll tell you, you have a list of computer instructions, and there are all kinds of things going on. It appears that in the consciousness system, we just have this ability to excite or to suppress some of the nerve systems, okay? I should also mention, and I just want to emphasize this, the nervous system is a tree structure. You'll see this in many, many books. Now, maybe I'm wrong, maybe a biologist will tell me this is not right, but I believe it's a tree structure. And these tree structures appear to be, this adjacency theory is applicable to these tree structures. So for me, this is looking like it's kind of genuine, okay? Now, when we talk about this sort of process, one of the things that people forever are talking about, especially the computer people, are, can you write a computer that does what the human brain does? And we're going through an era right now where we have companies building enormous-sized plants to carry computing equipment to do what they call artificial intelligence computing. Just more and more computers, and who knows what all of that is. I've never worked with this stuff, and I don't want to. I've worked with computers at other levels, but never liked that. And I would say, well, that's all interesting, but the kind of computer that the human nervous system is a different computer. And you should also understand all the time that in mathematics, we'll have more than one way to describe problems. You'll see this oftentimes in calculus, in graph theory, in the various subtopics of mathematics. We have different ways to solve the same problem, and we come with them. We come with them. Falling body problems, you can work that with the typical things we find in physics, or you can also think of it in statistical ways and graphic ways and so forth, okay? So what happens here is we seem to have, the human nervous system appears to be a different kind of computer, and I would guess that if this type of thinking is correct, then we will be designing computers that have more of a structure related to the structure of a tree, the dendrite structure image, and we would rethink through that as another kind of a computation system. And I assure you, there are people who study other computation systems, but oftentimes they're in different areas. There are a lot of them in Europe and so forth. You see some of the publications. Now, another topic I wanted to mention is some of this thinking about adjacency theory I developed way back in the 1990s. I had been at MATC at the time, and about that time, the little personal computers came out, and I jumped and I bought an IBM PS1, Personal System 1 computer, okay? And this is way before those, this is a long time ago already. This is 35 years ago or so, we had these computers. Well, on that computer, I had a program that actually behaved very similar to the theory, the ideas that I have here on adjacency theory about how things get shut down. What I was doing was saying, I'm going to give it some random numbers, and I wanted to produce a map, and it could do that. Okay, and so we had these exciting ideas. Some of those ideas were formulated, and you should realize that a lot of the thinking in our world, it kind of evolves over time. My process about this evolved from the time when my father had my mother buy bricks for me, and later on an erector set and so forth, so I could learn to do spatial reasoning better as a child, right? And so we say, well, that's decades ago, right? And so over time we learn and we tend to improve, and we all know that we get more and more information, as we get older, right? So, but what I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, another idea that was here was, I mentioned about self-organizing systems. And I say, it appears we have here a method for self-organizing, and that would be compatible with things. And now here's another one. Okay, I'm going to talk, right now I'm talking and I'm waving my arms. I'm talking and I can walk around, I can walk back and forth and so forth. And you'll say, how is it that you're able to move your arms at one time while you're talking? You're able to chew gum and walk, right? You're able to bend over or you're able to run and while you're running, talk and so forth. Well, it turns out that when you look at the adjacency theory concept, you can get islands of behavior. Okay? You're able to say, this part of the nervous system, we shut down some things, and this part of the nervous system, we shut down something else. And with the tree structure, they're not interfering with one another. And so it appears that the ability to be able to walk and talk and do two other things at one time is quite compatible with adjacency theory. So that doesn't put it away. It also, and so forth. And so what happens now is we've created a system in which we can maybe begin to understand ourselves in a whole different way. What we're able to do is say, hey, if adjacency theory is right, how should we think about ourselves? How should we think about the processes of the brain? Well, what happens is, if we would create some of these methods that we have, we program them and so forth, we would be able to create programs to interact with this type of thinking and so forth. And then also we could think about some really big ideas. In the field of mathematics, there are people who have been forever debating about, where does math come from? What is there in the universe that has this? They look out in the universe, and when I look at adjacency theory, and I'm saying, math is derived out of the structure of the human mind. It's a different kind of a concept. And so what happens is, these are topics that would have to be explored by people who are specialists in many areas. I'm not the specialist in all of those areas. I did programming things, I did the graphic things here and so forth, and I don't want to fool you and say that I know everything. I don't know everything, okay? I'm kind of a naive kid who was, took 20 years to get a degree. You've got a question?
Yeah, is it time for questions now?
Yeah, what we can do is, we can go into some questions. I'd be happy to hear your comments. I know these have been very provocative. Sure, go ahead. You want to make a comment?
Yeah, well, I thought I was pretty smart before I got here today, but this is way beyond me. I think I heard you say that this is the first time you've talked publicly about this?
That's correct.
And
This
so
is the
I'm
first time.
wondering what your plan is for presenting this to different groups and mathematicians and others, and getting some corroboration or debate or something like that. I can see it's far-reaching, but it sure would be interesting to hear comments and thoughts from people who are versed in this stuff, which I say is way beyond me.
Yeah, the material that I presented today is all new. Years ago, there was a media expert named Marshall McLuhan. Some of you may remember Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan, in his book, Understanding Media, I think, made a comment, and I don't remember if it was in the preface or something. He said, when you write a book, if you put in more than 15% new information, people are going to have a tough time with that book. So here I've come into a meeting, and I'm giving you a lot more than 15% new information. And the thing is, I expect people to have a certain amount of trouble understanding this, for me, it took a long time to get where we are. To find how to articulate it and explain it is another major challenge that we have, that I have. And I've thought about these things, but it's not my full-time activity. I'm an individual living in Milwaukee. I have to wash the dishes and do the laundry and clean the floors and shovel the snow and cut the grass. There are a lot of things in our lives besides doing this. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not in an ivory tower in the university and so forth. But I have a topic, and I said, I think this topic is of interest to people. But I will also tell you, relative to your comment there, a number of years ago, I believe it was in the 1990s, I went to a math conference to tell them about adjacency theory. This was before it was even connected to consciousness, a long way before it. And I had professors sitting in a room, maybe a dozen of them, and I gave them a paper and I talked about the thing. There was never a comment. They didn't know what I was talking about, okay? The material was so new, and it was left, and that was the end of that, okay? And so the thing is, you should say, okay, here's an idea. But there are ideas that take a long time for us to understand. And don't kid yourself. Okay, go ahead.
You're talking about computers acquiring consciousness, human consciousness. That terrifies me.
That's what?
Terrifies me.
It terrifies you. You're not the only one in the world. People talk about, the fear of what happens if we make computers that are too smart. And some of the people who are doing the artificial intelligence thing are trying to make computers that are super smart that way. So it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen where this is all going. Okay. But don't be intimidated. And I know you probably. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was talking for so long. I should have watched the clock. But I've given you an introduction, and we're going to think about it. And I think one of the saving points is for individuals to start understanding these things. Don't delegate it for other people to understand. What we have to do is we have to understand what's going on in our world, what are the threats to our existence, and so we need to know these things. And I'm always free to share what I know, and I'm not a world-class expert on any of this.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Christian.
Michael, I would think your work has implications for mental health professionals. I couldn't help but to think of Alderman Jonathan Brostoff, who took his own life. And here he was in the prime of his life. Everybody liked him. His kids were more of a joy than a burden. Everything was going well. Yet he had all these negative thoughts. Do you think there's any way that you could develop a system for which to eliminate the negative thoughts from your consciousness?
Okay, that's really a very good question. It's one that I've thought about sometimes in the past. It's like, if we understand the human brain, can we apply it to some of these real psychology problems, these psychiatric problems, medical problems, and other social problems, dealing with the communication issues, persuasion, and so forth? And I'll tell you one of the links I had. Many of you are familiar with Sigmund Freud. And he talked about people, having adjacencies in memory, right? Well, when you look at this thing, this consciousness theory, or you look at adjacency theory, you say, hey, what happens is, it looks like if we create a map, the elements in that map are related to one another, like Freud's thing, and then somehow there's a decision process in which individuals run in some directions. So I think that if we would do more modeling and think hard about these problems, if this really and truly is a good explanation of how the human brain works, what would happen is it would be applied to the real problems of human life. And of course, that's one of the things we really want to do. We we are forever struggling to have a higher quality life, a more sensible life, a more civilized world to live in. And I think, I really believe that this type of material could be worked out to apply to these social science problems and so forth. Okay? So you people have been very attentive. I really appreciate the, your attention and listening to these ideas. And you should always remember that sometimes the ideas that come from speakers are a little bit off, or maybe wacky or something. But in here, I think there's enough here that if it was subjected to the thoughts of individuals who are intelligent, who are trained, who could do research and open-minded, I think what would happen is we could use this to help improve the lives that we have and improve the world that we live in. Okay, so go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for coming. Everything that you've said has kind of brought back fragments of things that I've kind of come across before, especially when you were talking about the continuity of conscience. I took a class over at Marquette. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it dealt with mind theory, body theory, soul theory. I didn't know if any of that played into what you're referring to, or is this kind of, as you said, new thought? I just didn't know if that jogged anything for you. I'm trying to pull some things together.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it may not have. I just wanted to kind of make that statement.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. I think what we've done here is you've been given some of these basic ideas. We'll see where all of this goes, okay? And how it evolves, and whether other people might be interested in it, and so forth. And I think part of it, there'll be a lot of work on my shoulders to try to do more to explain what we have and to be able to make those explanations available to others, okay? So I hope everybody has enjoyed this today when we had 11.5 inches of snow, and most of us will be going out shortly again to do our work with one of the other mundane things, shoveling snow, okay? Anyway, thank you for your attention.